Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 9 Things Agile Leaders Do Better Than Non-Agile Ones with Mark Buchan. Now, before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions for Mark, please fire them over via the chat box, and he will answer as many as possible at the end of his talk. We are recording the webinar session, and this will be made available and sent to you by email. So now I'm going to hand over to Mark to begin the talk.
For a little few seconds while technology takes place or does its thing, so I'm waiting for something to come up on my screen to let me know that I can take control. So I'm still waiting for that to come in. Sounds like I might have lost my speaker as well. So I'm wondering now, can you hear me, Adele? We hand it over. Oh, here we go. So change presenter, that's me. So give me 1 second here, people. So now. Showing my screen. I'm hoping this is me now showing my screen. And any second now, I'm hoping that just turn this on now. 1 second. Alrighty, so I'm hoping now that everyone is able to hear me okay. We're just about to start the seminar, 9 things that Agile leaders do better than non-Agile ones. So, yeah, as Adele kindly said, if you could hold questions until the end, that would be great. And if I can, and if I see questions coming through as I go, then I'll do my very best to answer them as I go. So just a small bit about me then before we get started. I'm an Agile executive coach and a culture change consultant. I mean, I've been working in this Agile way long before Agile was a sexy term. I've been 25 years as an independent consultant, and I've now turned turncoat in some ways and actually gone now working for PA Consulting. You can see their website there if you want to see more about me and what we do and whatever, please feel free to do so. But look, what I'm here to talk about today is something that's very close to my heart. It's leadership. It's about helping bring the people back into Agile. Because I don't know about many of you out there whether or not you've heard about this thing called the Agile Manifesto. You know the thing that says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Yes, that one. The fact that, well, to my reflection, down through the years, I don't think we really have put the people back into Agile. We still seem to be governed by process, etc. But look, I'll get off that hobby horse for now. But I'm hoping that this session we're just about to embark on will be informative and useful, and hopefully educational for some of you, or maybe a reminder for some others. So, so onwards and upwards. Let's do this. So look, I'm giving a little insight into myself. Lover of all things Scottish. I know my accent doesn't sound very Scottish, more West Coast, I'm told. No, that would be wrong. That's the Irish you're hearing in me. So, but anyhow, an Irish-English Scotsman is probably the best way to describe me. Sounds like a start of a good joke, I know, but there we go. So look, here's a little insight into me. Attending the rugby quarterfinals there a couple of years ago with my son. There's my whiskey collection. There's Andy Murray, so like I say, all things Scottish. And there's the, I don't know if any of you out there know what that is down in the bottom right-hand corner, but that's the Calcutta Cup. There's something that I'm hoping is going to be claimed to be Scottish after this weekend. That's just to poke some fun at any English people listening out there who will appreciate that joke because it's one about Scottish rugby. Well, I think we're not a joke these days. I think we're doing rather well. Anyway, let me get back on topic. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, look. In a short space of time, we've done introductions now. I'm going to talk about this thing called Agile leadership and why we believe it's important, and what is this thing called Agile leadership. And I'm going to talk also about these 9 principles of Agile leadership that we've developed here at the Agile Business Consortium. And I'm going to give you a bit more insight into that and where we are on that particular journey, and what I would like from all of you people out there who are listening in today about what it is we might like from you in terms of helping move our mission forward. So then we'll have some time for Q&A, questions and answers, for anyone that's got any burning questions or wants to know more, and then we'll take some time to close down and give you some next steps. So here we go. Why and what is Agile leadership? So let's start with this question. This is quite a broad question, really, isn't it? We had, and I say we, the Culture and Leadership stream had a session in London the other day in, I think it was the Institute of, was it Electrical Engineers or Electrical Telecoms. Anyway, it was a wonderful big building on the south bank of the Thames. And we had some people come and help us to explore our best thinking to date around this thing called Agile leadership. And we presented the 9 principles to them, and what you're looking at today, or what you will look at shortly, will be some of those principles. But yeah, what we found in that session, and what I want to explore here just for the first few minutes of opening, is this notion about Agile leadership. Because I think sometimes we could be accused, or certainly what was leveled at us in the session was that, are we just trying to hijack everything that is good leadership and then just give it the label, or we'll just call that Agile leadership? Well, in short, no. I mean, again, this is why I sort of like the title of this session. It is about presupposing that there is such a beast as an Agile leader, and they are very different to what you might call traditional leaders. Or maybe they're different insofar as how they practice the business of change and making change happen and making it evolve or making it stick, or whatever is the propensity of any organization. So yeah, hence we get into these conversations about, well, look, what is an Agile leader? Yeah, how would we know one if we saw one? What is a good Agile leader, if you like? Well, quite a difficult one to answer, because there's a bit of a shocking statistic out there which says that only 10% of organizations are receiving the appropriate level of leadership agility for their organizational need, where they are at that moment in time, which is quite a big disparity, really. So this means that in the last 20 or so years since Kotter wrote some words in a book that said something along the lines of, most organizations are over-managed and under-led. Seems like we might still be in that same camp. So look, what's an Agile leader? Well, look, let me give you this definition, because we could spend hours over many beers or whiskeys or whatever your poison is to talk about these particular topics. But look, if we gave you this definition for now, that an Agile leader is one that attends to the current culture. It's a leader that's actually looking at growing a more Agile culture. And the reason for this is because Agile cultures need Agile leaders. Now, we can have a very quick and short conversation here, because if you're not interested at all in growing an Agile culture, chances are you won't be very interested in growing Agile leaders. So hence the causality here is quite apparent, is that what we discovered is there is a different sort of leadership needed for the Agile organization, as opposed to any of the other types of organization that exist. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. But today we'll most likely be keeping on topic here with Agile leadership, and rather than talking about the culture that goes behind that. So let's move ourselves along. So what is an Agile culture? Well, look, I'm not going to read this out to you. You'll get these slides later on. But here's a sort of a snippet, if you like. And it's come from this book, Diagnosing and Changing Organizational Culture, by Cameron and Quinn, I should say. And again, dynamic, entrepreneurial, places we take risks. Leaders are innovators and risk takers. Now, I offer you this for a minute, to just sort of sit back, those of you that are currently working in large organizations, small or even medium organizations. Does the Agile culture at this moment in time, as it's described there, describe your current culture? Because if you're reflecting on this thinking, maybe it's an all or nothing thing, we either are or we're not, then that might be a bit of a fallacy too. I mean, if we were to think of cultures as not being all of one thing and nothing of another. In fact, our cultures are most likely a bit of a mix. So hence when we talk about an agile culture, yes, these are the things they would want more than, say, maybe a more bureaucratic or hierarchical organization which would value structure and such things. So excuse me for a second. My throat is drying up, so I must drink some water. Please excuse me. Right, okay, so anyway, like I say, an agile culture. And what we want is agile leaders to grow agile cultures. Because if we ask ourselves, look, what is the real job, of an agile leader, or any sort of leader for that matter? I would argue strongly, I would contend, that the main purpose, the main job for any leader is to go about the changing, nurturing, evolving of their cultures in their organizations. But yet many of the leaders that I've worked with in the past, and some of the stories I've heard from many of my colleagues of leaders they've worked with also, is that the culture it tends to be somewhere down the list of the high list of priorities of things that leaders need to attend to. And quite often, there's not enough time devoted for this very, very important activity. So hence, again, an agile leader might be someone who recognizes that one major part of their role is making sure that they evolve and grow culture rather than being laissez-faire about it and just letting people down below in the organization get on with the growing of the culture, because that in some ways is abdicating responsibility. It's abdicating leadership responsibility, and we might call that laissez-faire leadership. So look, and going back to the comment that I made earlier about, well, look, agile leadership, is that just another password, if you like, for good leadership? Is that all we're trying to say? And the answer is no, because agile leadership is made up of a lot of different things, and this particular slide here is going into some of that detail for you to give you an idea of some of those things that have informed the thinking behind agile leadership. Some people might call it one thing or another, but look, it's neither one of these things, but it's a mixture of all of them. So I'm not going to go into these in any great detail, but look, if any of you out there want to know more about some of the thinking behind this, please feel free to contact me after the call, the webinar, and I'll be happy to share more of that thinking. But as we go through the webinar today, I will touch on a number of these things, especially leadership agility. That's something I'd like to talk a lot about, because it's one of the models that I have a great deal of time and respect for. So, so let's motor on now and think about one of the big challenges behind agile leaders, because one of the things we're going to have to put out there straight away, is this notion, this idea that quite often leaders might be more generous in giving themselves high rankings, high gradings, when they're asked to consider how agile are they as leaders. Now, I don't know about you, but I've worked with some projects or programs where people have been asked the question, how agile are you? And are asked to self-assess against some vague set of notions about what is agile and what isn't agile. Well, until we've had those conversations about what is and isn't agile, it's very hard for us to start to measure, and certainly hard for us to meaningfully measure what it is we actually mean by agile, and thus by definition, what is a good agile leader. But look, the one thing that we are going to pay very close and particular attention to when we're looking at growing agile leaders is something that we call congruence, as we've put down in the slide here. This is this idea, this notion is when our thoughts, words, and actions are all aligned. When we're acting congruently is when every bit of us is, if you like, walking our talk. Not just that we're talking the big talk, we're actually also living the talk. We're demonstrating. So we're living our values through our behaviors, and it's very clear and apparent for people to see this. So when we're congruent, everyone knows that we are, And they are more inclined, our followers are more inclined to believe us if we're acting in accordance with what we're asking our followers to do. And quite often what we're asking our followers to do more than anything else is we're asking them to change. And this is where life becomes rather interesting, when as leaders we ask our people to change if we're not maybe willing to change ourselves. And hence this little comment down here at the bottom of this slide, theory and action versus our espoused theory. Well, look, there's a wonderful book out there that many of you might like to read if you haven't read already, called Organizational Traps, where Chris Argyris talks about this notion of our espoused theories, the theories we say that we do, the things that we say that we do, but then they are very different to the things that we actually do. And it's about knowing and measuring the difference between the two. Now, why am I bothering going to this detail? Because look, well, this is the first and most important difference between an agile leader and a non-agile leader. Because quite honestly, many leaders in many organizations are, if you like, just waiting, if you like, for their time to pass in the organization as they move through. And I mean this in the greatest and most respectful sense, that actually their leadership isn't as agile as the organization would need right now. So in which case, part of what we'll have to do is turn our attention to succession management and help leaders within organizations become more agile. So it's going to be a question of change the leaders or change the leaders. But again, as I said earlier, if agile cultures, agile organizations aren't of interest to you, then you can largely discard anything we were talking about here because it just won't apply. But if we are talking about the need for agile leaders in your organization, then you most definitely are listening to the right place here, because this is what we're going to talk more about. Now, so as I mentioned earlier, leadership agility. I mean, I cannot sing the praises of this book high enough. Everywhere I go, I always recommend people, they all to read this book. It is absolutely awesome. I relate to this book so strongly and largely because, Mr. Joyner, or Dr. Joyner, I should say, puts first and foremost at the center of the agile leadership's development journeys themselves. It's about looking at how they develop as leaders, and here, if you like, is some insight into how Dr. Joyner refers to leadership agility. And again, some useful words there for us to be mindful and aware of. And for those of us that work in Agile sometimes, we relate largely to what's been said here. And this takes us to think about some messages that this actually brings up before we start to talk about the principles of Agile leadership. So I'm sorry to say that there is some bad news here for people listening, and let me tell you what that bad news is. It's this bit of news I gave you earlier, that research has shown that only 10% of leaders have the leadership agility that matches their current business environment's needs. Yeah. Now that's actually quite shocking. So hence, leaders need to up their game if they want to be more agile, if they want to become better leaders in the agile business context, in the agile sense of growing agile organizations, or even delivering agile business change. So hence, this notion of agile leadership is far-reaching, but first and foremost at the center of it all is the leadership's development journey. But there is some good news around this, and you'll be glad to hear that actually leadership agility is something that's very natural and is part of human development psychology. I mean, if you trace the psychology and the development of psychology for leaders, you'll see, as Dr. Joyner does in his book, that there's an emergent form where people move from experts to achievers to catalysts and so on up to synergists. And again, I'm not going to give a full definition of what they are, but I thoroughly recommend buying the book and reading it, because look, part of what we do and what we offer as consultants and coaches in this space of helping nurture agile organizations and grow agile organizations is helping the leaders attend to their leadership skills, their leadership capacities, their competencies, and their capabilities. So that's the good news. But it is rather inconvenient because it really does mean that look, if we want to change our cultures and our organizations, it begins with leadership. And leadership is going to drive the change in the organization. It will drive that change by being models of the new culture. Now, one of the worrying trends that I see in transformations in organizations is that I tend to think that people jump on the culture bandwagon maybe just a little bit too soon. And this might sound rather contradictory to some other people's experiences, but it's worthy of a further reflection, I'm sure. But quite often, we presuppose or guess we know exactly what it is we need to do, what behaviors need to change in our organization in order to bring about the new culture. And what we tend to do is we then put that into the organization and tell the people in the depths of the organization, go and do these things. And if you go and do these things, we will change our culture. And if we change our culture to this, then we'll be more agile, we'll have things delivered faster, we'll have them better, and we'll also have them cheaper. Hurrah! So that'll tick all our boxes for us. So but that's actually leaders then abstaining themselves from their own change, stepping back from their own change, because quite often it's the leadership behaviors that will still live in the organization because they haven't been held up for scrutiny. They won't have been held as accountable for their old behaviors, and maybe these old behaviors don't align with the new culture, in which case the new culture is unlikely to stick. So in which case we'll have wasted a lot of time, money, and investment in growing and nurturing an agile culture that actually doesn't exist at all, or won't exist. Once maybe the leaders decided to go elsewhere, or the consultants have left the building and things go back to business as usual, and therefore there's a lot of waste. So this isn't something that we want to do. So hence, growing agile leaders, making that part of the transformation activity, this is what needs to happen. And it's with this in mind that we've now come up with these 9 principles of leadership agility. And it's taken me like the best part of 20 minutes to finally get around to talking about what we're going to talk about, but I honestly believe that, that this sets of pre-framing, if you like, this pre-framing thinking is quite useful to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, let me just take a quick sip here. So we're going to talk about some principles, some the 9 principles of agile leadership, which, as we say, we had a breakfast meeting in London the other morning, and it was a great session. And at the end, I did thank everybody for what they'd actually contributed to the thinking in the room that day, because it gave us some real opportunity to make some changes, which we've already started to introduce. But by and large, we've left everything that we presented to the group pretty much the same in here. These principles are exactly as they were presented to the group, just by slides rather than by bits of paper. So what I'm going to do, if this is okay for all of you listening, is to offer you this little experiment. I'm going to present the next slide now, and what I would like you to do is, in this slide, just to think about these slides just for a moment, and go through each of those principles, and then what I'm going to do is I'll reveal a little bit more wording around each of those, and give you a bit of a voiceover, if you like, over each of these principles, to give you some better understanding. And if I could ask you in the questions box to maybe just put down some thoughts as we go through each principle about what does this principle mean to you, but equally what does the principle maybe not mean to you. And that would be a useful way of us having some questions and answers at the end, because I'd really like to get your thoughts and feelings and your best thinking around these principles, because there's no way we presuppose or assume that we've actually got the right answer here, but we think these are a good place to start, and we feel that these start some great conversations in organizations when we talk about this thing called leadership agility. So there we go. There's 9 up there. I'm going to go through each slide now, or each of these principles one at a time, provide you some, you know, a bit around the why and the what we mean by the principle. But after that, then, how come it's different? And that's pretty much me meeting my contract of this webinar, is that these are going to be the 9 things. And in fact, I think I've over-committed on my promise here. I'm giving you way more than 9 things that Agile leaders do. I'll let you count up how many they are. And maybe you can tell me at the end, and we could change the webinar title to, I don't know, 34 things, or however many it is you're getting at the end. Anyway, enough of this. Let me just move on. We'll speak a bit more about each of these principles. So, actions speak louder than words. It is our first principle, and again, this leans very heavily on this notion that we've already been talking about, that Agile leaders are ones that put their own development at the center, you know, of the organizational change. They recognize that they need to be the change for their organization rather than just talk about the change. I can't tell you how many organizations I've worked in where, you know, people at the coal face, at the front end, you know, who are having to face off against customers every day. Sometimes it feels like a battle. It's like a war zone out there for these people. And the leaders, you know, have maybe removed themselves somewhat from being in amongst all of that. So when leaders are telling people they need to be changed and change their behaviors, well, yes, they would happily change their behaviors, but equally, people are sometimes going to look back and say, well, what are you changing? And, you know, transformation is far easier to put into an organization when the leaders are themselves saying, look, I'm changing. I recognize that part of what I have been doing has been part of the problem, and here's how we're actually going to change it. I will change, and therefore that will hopefully give you the opportunity for you to change as well. So hence people, you know, I believe, and just for me personally, you know, I follow people that are actually congruent, that actually believe what they're saying. And to me, I find that inspiring when people actually sign up for their own change. You know, it's unlikely I'm going to follow a leader or have any time or respect for a leader if I'm thinking that they're just actually giving me flannel, you know, as it were, just giving me words without any action. And, you know, as a coach, one of the things that's part of my job, part of my role as a coach and consultant, is to actually feed back to the leader and help them hold themselves accountable when they're not doing what they say they're going to do. Because quite often it's those actions, like we say, that are going to get in the way of the organization growing. So, I think that's all to say about that, to be honest. So what's different about that? So what can an Agile leader do different than to maybe a traditional leader, someone who maybe is of a traditional mindset? And so, yeah, well, while we talk about this, we might also think, well, what about leaders that are running waterfall projects or programs? Can they do any of this stuff? Absolutely. You know, the type of process you're using isn't a reflection or an indicator of your leadership agility. It's very little to do with it. You will choose the processes that are best for your particular projects, programs, or portfolios. That's why we have a framework in place that provides you the opportunity to be able to pick and choose what is most appropriate. But in this space of business change, what we are talking about here is the leader's personal change. So hence, leaders reflect and they retrospect. They just don't talk about change, they embody their change. Yeah? And it's not just about what they know, and this doesn't mean it's about who they know, although it is, but it's about how they can find out if they don't know. And yeah, there's something that's to be said about leaders who are humble and that actually present themselves as someone who doesn't know the answers, although sometimes that's quite a scary place to be, putting yourself out there and allowing yourself to be vulnerable in front of your workforce and say, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what our future is going to be. Sometimes people prefer the honesty, you know, rather than being closeted in lots of cotton gloves, making sure that we don't expose people to too much hurt in the organization and thus overparent them, which is maybe never a good place to go. So look, there's the first of the principles, and again, interested to hear what your thoughts might be about it, about what would you expect from a principle that says actions speak louder than words. So the next principle, improving quality of thinking leads to improved outcomes. So what was on my mind here when we were writing this particular principle is that quite often the organizations that we work in are busy, busy, busy organizations. And, you know, I can't think of any organization ever that I've ever worked in that wasn't anything other than busy. So what are we asking for here? What are we saying? Well, look, we're not saying we should stop all activity, but what we should say is we need to give some more time, some more space for thinking about our problems. When I've worked with board members or coaching boards of directors, you know, it strikes me quite often that the number of items on the agenda that these guys have to go through in the one day a month that they're expected to meet up and actually discuss all of these issues, challenges, you know, initiatives that are ongoing throughout the organization. You know, quite often all they can do is give a cursory 5-minute overview of something that might be highly complex, something highly technical that's going to really impact our business 3 to 6 months down the road. And we're not able to give it the quality of time that it will need. So again, things that we might do here as Agile leaders is to recognize and understand that, look, we do need to be more laser-like in how we target ourselves and focus on particularly the highest priorities of our business, making sure we deliver on the business change that's going to make the biggest impact. So hence, leaders need to slow down. They need to take different approaches to how they go about problem solving. And quite often, how they go about problem solving is the way that they've always gone about problem solving. They don't maybe recognize the different types of problems that they're having to contend with, the difference between maybe simple, complicated, complex, or even chaotic situations that emerge on a day-to-day basis. How you deal with each of those types of change is very, very different. And quite often, leaders are responding just at the spur of the moment, fighting the next fire, moving from one fire to the next. And this doesn't engender, you know, good quality of thinking in organizations. So quite often, one of the things we ask for Agile leaders to do is to slow down, is to actually give themselves time to think differently, give themselves time to see things from many different perspectives, many different angles. And rather than using what might be simple cause and effect models, you know, maybe sometimes it's cause and effect with a lot of analysis. We've got very complicated systems. This maybe isn't the most appropriate way of actually identifying or solving problems in that domain. We might have to employ different forms of thinking, complexity thinking, systems approaches. We might even have to put together things like facilitative workshops which get people from many different parts of the organization all working together. And this engenders more complexity into how we go about solving our problems. But equally, taking time to get the right people involved up front and slowing ourselves down, giving ourselves time to consider how do we respond to this set of challenges, to this initiative, to this opportunity. Because how we respond to each of these can be very, very different. Yeah? So, oh, and there's a little note at the bottom there about this thing called learning groups. Now, this is another wonderful thing that organizations can put into their organization. And they're wonderful little, how to say, meetings that meet regularly over a period of time, every 4 to 6 weeks, where we explore certain issues, challenges in the organization we want to solve. And these are, if you like, working groups that are put in place to solve these particular issues. And quite often they're sponsored by senior managers, and these forms of getting cross-silo collaboration happening are very, very useful to start to bring about more of an agile culture into our organizations. So, organizations improve through effective feedback. Now, if you're like me when you read this, you probably might ask the question, what do you mean by effective feedback? You know, because effective feedback could be different for different people. But look, from a leader's perspective, I'm always encouraged by the leader that goes out soliciting feedback feedback, asking for feedback about their own behaviors, about how they're sounding, about how they're coming across, how they're presenting themselves. There is much information that we can glean from our peers and the people we work with on a day-to-day basis. But a lot of this largely is based on our ability to be able to trust that when we ask someone for feedback, that they've got our best interests in heart. Yeah, that they're maybe not trying to have a pop at us. They're not using this as an opportunity to bring us down a peg or two, when we're asking for feedback. So again, we'd be unlikely to ask those sorts of people for feedback if that's what we believe that their intentions would be. So leaders ask for feedback. They ask for it regularly, and they ask for it in a timely fashion too. There's no point in asking for feedback after it's 10 months after the event. We're unlikely to remember all of what might have been important at that moment of time. And of course our memory will change over a period of time as we maybe make things a little more comfortable to tolerate in our heads. Sometimes we might eliminate some uncomfortable messages, some uncomfortable bits of feedback that we really didn't want to hear, and we might instead focus in on the very positive stuff that we heard the person say, and maybe not attend to where we could make the biggest improvements. But look, one of the important messages, and this is one of the very useful bits of feedback that we got the other morning in our breakfast meeting, was that giving feedback and offering feedback to people, it's all very well and good, but quite often, sometimes people don't see or don't recognize that any of the feedback has been acted on or even been taken account of. So hence, I think Agile leaders are leaders that will actually go that extra mile in helping people know that, look, I've taken on board what you said, and either what you've said was very useful and I've now applied myself to do things in a different and better way, or maybe it hasn't been very useful, thank you very much, but maybe I don't really need to take that on board. Now, that may or may not be the case, but each of us have our own responsibility for what we decide is useful feedback and what we decide isn't. But quite often it goes back to principle 2, slowing down. Just don't take everything as read. You might want to digest the information that you're taking on board. Just to use a sort of a gluttonous metaphor there, to talk about how we might, rather than swallow something whole, actually start to attend to what was actually meant by this, and getting a better idea. So what's different? So look, leaders courageously asking for feedback. I might shock some of you who are listening into this webinar at the minute, and if I was to tell you that actually I've been told in some organizations that actually no, we don't want feedback here, because that means we would have to change ourselves. Or I don't want feedback because it's uncomfortable. It tends to be, sometimes truth hurts, and this is where I believe a good coach can support and help executives to make meaning around some of the feedback that they are receiving, because quite often any piece of feedback will have some small piece of truth in it somewhere, and it might say more about the person giving the feedback than the person receiving the feedback. But quite often it's useful to have a coach to be able to reflect back in on and understand what it is people are saying and identifying themes. I mean, is this a recurring theme in my behavior? It keeps coming up. So, again, we need to understand that dialogue is changes of dialogue. It shouldn't really be a debate. It's something that we can negotiate around and get a better idea of what we would seek to change. And here's a very dangerous word on this fourth bullet point: conflict. Surfacing conflict through having uncomfortable conversations. Yeah, that's really what we're referring to here. And quite often, conflict is suppressed in organisations. It's not allowed to emerge. We're not allowed to have the uncomfortable conversations, the conversations that provoke, the conversations that other people might find a little bit provocative or a little bit edgy. Sometimes we're not allowed to talk about undiscussables or the elephants in the room, whereas actually these are some of the things that might get in the way of our change. And also, I think Agile leaders are ones that it was somewhere mentioned elsewhere in these principles somewhere, that they're more empathetic. And hence, look, when we're in dialogue with people, attending to non-verbal communication, the body language which has been presented to us, because quite often we'll find the truth hidden in the body language, not just in the words that people are speaking. So, so people require meaning and purpose to make work fulfilling. Again, there's been some great work done out there by the likes of Deci and Ryan, or I think it's Deci and Ryan, I'm not sure how to pronounce the man's name, but it's all this work that's been done on self-determination theory, self-determinism, and it's largely been written about by Daniel Pink in his book Drive. And again, I think the world's gone crazy that now we all just think that it's only about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. They're the only three things now that motivate people. Well, sorry, that's a rather overly simplistic way of looking at things. Because when we look at purpose, if we uncover and unpick, what do we mean by purpose? Well, look, purpose is different for different people, for different individuals, for different teams. And quite often this activity of the values exercise, when we go into organizations, quite often we're asked to look at a new set of values for the organization, a set of aspirational values, values that we want to live by, live our new lives by. And quite often when organizations embark on an agile transformation, they'll look at the agile values. Now, these agile values prove a wonderful place to start discussions, and I'm not going to rattle off all of what they are because many of you probably know quite a number of them, but I'm talking about things like, for instance, autonomy, teamwork, collaboration. These are all lofty concepts, but equally they are motivational concepts, because when they're taken down to a finer degree, we find that each of these motivators, if you like, vary from person, from team to team. So hence, as an organization, if we stick 7 values up on a board, whatever those values are, chances are people aren't going to align with all of them. In fact, chances are maybe they'll align with 1 or 2, and they'll be seen to be largely in living those values as part of the organization, but maybe some of the others they don't really relate to. And quite often these are conversations that are left unsaid in organizations because, hey, we don't want to be seen as not being a team player because we salute the values or we don't salute the values. If we question the values or challenge the values, then maybe we're seen to be acting out of the crowd. So therefore, we might want to do something different. We might want to encourage people in our organizations to have more chats about what's important and meaningful and purposeful to them. Because for individuals in teams, as I say, and across teams, it's very, very different. And the number of teams that I've worked with in the past that have told me that quality is the most important thing to them. And absolutely I believe them that it was. But the organization doesn't believe that, because what the organization wants is speed. It thinks that agility is about getting things out the door quicker, delivering rubbish quicker, the same old rubbish quicker. That's more important to people, rather than actually can we stop here and start to produce quality rather than producing rubbish. So hence, we demotivate and demoralize our teams if we don't give them the opportunity to create something that's valuable, that's actually something that's of higher quality. That is where some teams, not saying all teams, but some teams find a great deal of motivation. And you take that away from them, then you run the risk of demotivating them. So look, we're fair or ripping through these principles now, and we'll move on to what's different here. Recognize the teams are different. Yeah, we can do all sorts of things here to help our teams improve. And doing different types of values activity as well is quite a good place to start, and recognizing that each and every team is different. Now, I'm looking at my watch here, and I'm mindful that maybe we might not get through all of these, because this, I think, is the 5th one. Emotion as a foundation to enhance creativity and innovation. And I'm just wondering if maybe we leave 10 minutes at the end for conversations, for any questions, then I'm happy to chat more about that, so give us 10 minutes at the end. So maybe we'll just motor on for another 5 or 6 minutes, see how many more we can get through, and then we'll say 10 minutes at the end for questions. So, emotion. Wow. Small word, big topic. Yeah, as part of the culture and leadership stream, we've been having some most interesting conversations, both in the team and outside the team, because emotion is something that tends to rattle a lot of people's cages. Many people would subscribe to the belief that actually we need to leave our emotions at home. Whereas this is something I think is rather dangerous, because having studied psychology for some years and put myself on my own journey in psychology, I know that when I've been asked to be somebody else, that's quite a difficult ask. That's quite a big ask, because those of you that would have known me or have worked with me in the past will know that I'm a rather emotional person. I do like to think of myself as rather creative and innovative as well. So there are some benefits for having somebody like me who is emotional working in an organization. But yet, how do people translate that word emotional? See, the word emotion is one that sometimes rattles some cages for people, because when they think of an emotional person, they're thinking of someone who maybe is a bit, how would I say, a bit living on the edge, too maybe too hyperactive, too much, overly sensitive maybe to criticism, but you can't really say anything, and maybe they hold us ransom, they throw the toys out of the pram. Do you understand the sort of thing I'm saying? I mean, this is what we mean by emotional, and emotional, therefore, has a bit of a negative connotation to it, doesn't it? So this is why I wanted to put at least one principle that touches on exactly that notion, this idea that, look, we can't just leave our emotions at home. That's not something that's going to work for us. But what we do need to do is we need to bring our emotions, because they're a part of our human selves, that if we do leave them at home, we're in danger of leaving our best selves at home. So hence, in order to better deal and better manage emotion, it's what we are looking for is what we call emotionally safe environments. Okay, that's really what's important here. It is about making sure that that leaders provide that environment for their people, a trusting environment where we mentioned conflict in the previous principle, and hence people's worry around conflict is that if something kicks off, that we're all going to fall out, we'll never be friends again, and nobody will talk to each other, and there's going to be bad feeling around the office. So therefore, the best thing to do is to actually hide conflict and don't surface it, because people will respond emotionally. Yes, indeed, that's exactly what will happen. So hence, quite often what I do when I go into an organization is, once I get to trust people and get people to trust me a little bit, I'll run what I call bloodletting sessions. Sessions that are somewhat cathartic for individuals. They can just say whatever they want, get it off their chest, and identify positive ways in which we can use that message to change the organization. Because quite often, emotions contain messages, and these messages are quite often messages for us to move, to do something different. And to be honest, a large part of why people buy into this agile concept is because they're told that you'll be more innovative and more creative. Now, if innovation and creativity aren't important to you, then you might not even have to worry about this. But I would suspect that, like most organizations these days, it's actually going to be the very thing that's going to make the difference between you and your competition, is that difference with your people. Your people, and if you allow them to bring their best selves to their work and apply themselves in innovative, creative, meaningful, purposeful ways, you'll get far more out of them than you would ever have done by treating them like machines or mechanisms, which is the old form, the old style of leadership. So look, that probably brings us nicely to the end of the talky bit of the seminar, because my voice is just about running out anyway. I've been slugging water at appropriate moments here. So, so what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is now to turn this over to you guys. And say, well, look, we've only had a chance to go through 5 of the principles here. There's another 4 to do. But I'd sooner answer some questions here first, if there was any. and maybe find another opportunity in the future if this was interesting enough to people to talk about the other principles, and maybe open the conversation out further. So, over to you guys. So if I look now at the questions, there are any questions? Oops. So I'm just wondering if Adele is still on the line. I'm looking to see here if I can find where the questions are, and I can't see any questions. So I'm here seeing some things now saying speak up please. I'm hoping that that you guys have been able to hear me. So I'm not seeing any questions at the minute on here, so maybe what I'll do is I'll just go through and do the rest of the principles then until maybe there's some other questions or until someone interrupts me. So let's just motor on then. Hello, hello, I hear somebody.
It's Adele. We do have a number of questions coming through, so you should see a little hand pop up in the corner of your, or on the side of your screen if you want to have a look through some of those. If not, I can talk you through some of the questions that we've had in.
Could you talk me through them, please? Because yeah. I can't actually see any hands or questions or anything, and I might have deleted something, so apologies.
Sure. So first question, is it possible to change a traditional leader into a servant leader?
Yes. So that's a very one-answered question, but absolutely it is. But the most important thing, you know, it isn't about what you would teach that leader, but whether or not they wanted to be a servant leader. I think that the important point here is that many times the enticing job of leader means that you can get to tell people what to do rather than be told what to do or to be asked, could you support us in this way? So the emphasis of leader is sort of turned about face, and in all honesty, to some leaders that's not very digestible at all.
Great. And next question, what's your advice for a leader moving from a non-agile environment into an agile environment?
So for a leader, so now that one of the principles we've got down here is that leaders live at many different levels of the organization. Depending on where they were in the organization, my advice would be go find an agile buddy, someone that you can sort of hang on their shirt tails and start to learn off them what it is that's been their journey. If your organization is engaging in transformation, hopefully they'll be also hiring agile coaches. And again, from our perspective, an agile coach lives at 3 levels. It's at an executive level, a management level, or down at the team level. So depending on the leader, get yourself some coaching or some mentoring, or just hook up with a buddy, which will be invaluable, because learning some of the behaviors and attitudes and the mindset, you know, comes over a period of time, not something that happens overnight.
Great. And next question, how do we start when an organization is willing to consider agile leadership?
Well, if they're ready to start, then the first place to start in my world is at the leadership level. Quite often what I do is I ask the leaders to sit down, and we'll have individual chats, one-to-one, about, you know, what it is that's different about this culture, what do we want to make different, how do we want to improve the culture, what's not agile about it, and what we really like to be agile about it. But more importantly, I think, you know, getting our heads around what it is we want from it is one thing, but more importantly, we need to have a sponsor, someone that actually is going to be a champion for that change and actually drive the change through the organization, and that needs to be a very senior person in the organization. So we'd be recommending somebody at the CXO level, someone at that sort of level that will challenge behaviors further down the organization, because quite often that's what will get in the way of your change.
Great. And next question, is the word agile not being overused when it comes to leadership here?
You know, I think that's a fair challenge. You know, if it has been overused, it's because we really do want to labour the point. and let people know that there is something different about Agile leadership than traditional leadership. Bill Joyner, I mean, I've recommended his book in the slides there. He sent me an article last week that he wrote some time ago, and this was about how the culture emerges, you know, when we coach leaders to be better leaders, and you know, it's well worth a read, you know, for anybody who wants to explore that further. I might have lost you there.
No, great question.
Oh,
Last question. How does this fit with Koch's Accelerate when the leaders may be part of the hierarchy, dealing with business as usual rather than personally leading the change?
Yes. You see, this again, it's where I come back to my initial comment, is that quite often leaders are too busy doing their day job, if you like, which is running the organization. And I'd sort of argue and contend that, that they're doing the job of managers rather than doing the job of leaders, because the job of a leader in our world, from an Agile perspective, is that guy or gal who's going to be envisioning, is going to be setting out a future, is going to be dealing with the multiple needs of the stakeholders and how sometimes conflicts emerge as those needs of the stakeholders become apparent. So the job of the leader really is about attending to the culture and attending to what's going to make the organization more effective and giving it as much change as it can sustain at any one time. Whereas unfortunately too many leaders in those positions are more managers. They're managing change, they're driving change, they're pushing change. And in all honesty, I think Kotter, the model as used back then, absolutely fantastic. But quite honestly, we're now in a land of change which is very, very much more complex. You know, and therefore, Kotter's model will only take us so far.
Excellent. So that's it for questions at this time, Mark. If anyone has any others, shall I get them to drop you an email directly in the follow-up? I'll put your details on there.
That's awesome. Yeah, so that sort of brings us to exactly where I was going to go then to finish this off. So look, what's next? If you want to know more about our framework and about what we're doing, and then what we're looking for is some organizations to come along and help us to actually start to apply these principles and to make them useful for you. So help us spread the word and connect with us. So do come along and look at the agilebusiness.org. I suspect most people listening here already have, but tell your friends and family and everyone else about it. This, to me, it's going to be so big for this year. This is just going to blow people's minds, I feel. So if you want more information on ABC, speak to Jenny Bailey, most awesome lady. She'll love to hear from you. If you want to know more about the culture and leadership stream that we're running, and if you'd like to help us with more of your insights, knowledge, or questions, or anything like that, you can get in touch with either Katie, her email's there, or you can get in touch with myself. There's my work number and email and everything else. So I think that's all I really wanted to say. I think we're done unless we have any more questions. So hence, it's nice to give people another couple of minutes back in their diary.
Great. Thanks, Mark. And thank you, everyone, again for listening. Hope to hear from you soon.
Great. Thanks, Adele.
Thanks.